It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. A Conservative MP crosses the floor, defecting to Labour, shocking both the Tories and the opposition.
When we look at this year alone, it's record numbers of small boats arrivals. So he's not stopping the boats and he's letting the country down.
Also tonight, after targeted strikes in Rafah, the US pauses a shipment of weapons to Israel.
Israel shouldn't launch a major attack in Rafah without accounting for and protecting the civilians that are in that battle space.
The Russian defence attaché is expelled from the UK for spying, apparently using several properties in England as bases. We investigate if Russia crossed a line. Severe flooding kills nearly 100 people in Brazil after days of torrential rain. Just miles apart, Prince Harry spends the day with Princess Diana's family as the King holds a garden party at Buckingham Palace. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. Rishi Sunak most likely went into Prime Minister's questions today, knowing it was going to be a difficult day after a huge defeat in the local elections last week. But no one could have predicted a Conservative MP defecting to Labour. It shocked Tory MPs sitting on the bench watching as Natalie Elphicke, known for being from the right of the party, crossed the floor. Labour politicians too have been asking their own questions. Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
Come in. You're very welcome. Good to see you.
Keir Starmer today greeting his second Tory defector in as many weeks.
Really good day.
That's been a great day.
Really fantastic.
Yeah.
The Labour leader and this once Tory right-winger, not a natural pairing. But Dover MP Natalie Elphicke apparently now aligned with her new boss on the issue of stopping the boats.
Rishi Sunak, he is the man who said he would stop the boats. And yet when we look at this year alone, it's record numbers of small boats arrivals.
Prime Minister's questions the moment she picked to cross the floor, Sir Keir Starmer beaming as her former colleagues were left blindsided and bemused.
In addition to losing 2 Tory MPs in 2 weeks, the Prime Minister's been on the receiving end of some of the biggest by-election swings in history.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this time last year I reminded him of some advice, actually, from his own mentor, Tony Blair, who had said at the time he can be as cocky as he likes about local elections, but come a general election, it's policy that counts, Mr. Speaker.
But this latest defection, a symptom of a wider problem Sunak's struggling to grip. Conservative colleagues invited to Number 10 to give the PM feedback in the wake of the worst local election results in 4 decades. Even experienced hands want answers. What do you want to say to the Prime Minister? What's your question going to be?
Focus and deliver.
Focus and deliver.
Show a bit of discipline, show a bit of purpose, show that we want to stay here.
How are you feeling about the local election results?
Oh, the local election results were what we expected, and they weren't great, but we will carry on. But
those on the right more interested in going backwards than forwards.
We need to bring back Boris on the front line of politics. We need to unite Conservatives.
And for others, the answer perhaps too bleak to even acknowledge. Do you think you can still win the general election, sir? Reform's leader also in Westminster and in a rather more buoyant mood. You've got them rattled.
Completely rattled. But, I mean, what does Natalie Elphicke think she's doing? It's a sign of how desperate they are, that within their 330 MPs, they haven't got anybody with any vision, any guts, any courage, any leadership.
But leadership contenders are plenty. Robert Jenrick out today to talk migration with a pointed nod to the right. Nigel Farage, would you welcome him back into the Conservative Party, or is that a no deal for you personally?
I would have no problem with him being a member of the Conservative Party.
You know, there's a whole wing of your party that find that thought absolutely abhorrent.
I don't think that taking a robust line on immigration is in any sense a drift to the right of the political spectrum. I think this is an entirely mainstream view that is shared by the vast majority of the British public.
Do you look at these results, Robert, and think we're going to lose the general election?
Well, these were appalling local election results. Let's not beat around the bush. and they point towards a very serious defeat for the government at the general election unless we can change course.
Election defeats, party defections, internal detractors. But despite it all, this now the fixed state, and so a bit of time to see if something will turn up.
Well, Beth joins us now from Downing Street. So, Beth, a sucker punch for Rishi Sunak, another defection, but awkward questions too for the Labour leader.
Yes, Anna. I mean, it's clearly a body blow to a Prime Minister that's just had his worst local election defeat for the Conservative Party in 40 years and then has the spectacle of an MP crossing the floor as he's in the House. It caught everyone by surprise. But I have to say, it's not completely straightforward for Keir Starmer too tonight. I've spoken to a number of MPs and there is a lot of unhappiness on the Labour benches. One senior MP says they felt genuinely a bit hurt by it all. I just expected better. Never underestimate the ability of politics to disappoint. Another MP on the left of the party said it's gone down very badly and a feeling of deep disappointment and almost disbelief. And that goes a long way beyond the left of the party. This person goes on to say, an opportunist whose virtual entire political activity has been centred upon opposing Labour values is welcomed with open arms. The issue being that Natalie Elphicke has always been on the right of the Conservative Party, so for her to cross the floor and come into the arms of Labour is quite difficult for some MPs to swallow. When you talk to those around Keir Starmer, what they are telling me is that there are so many on the side of the Tories that just think this government needs to be brought to an end. That's one source within Starmer's office tonight. I think it helped that Natalie Elphicke is standing down at the next election, so there wasn't an issue about whether she would campaign as a Labour candidate. But look, despite the kind of unsettledness of all of Westminster, I think there is a bigger picture here in terms of the optics. For Keir Starmer, he's had 2 defections in 11 days. Dan Poulter, a former health minister, quitting the Tories, crossing the floor to say that Labour's better on the NHS, and today he gets a Conservative MP in Dover switching over, saying that the Prime Minister's broken promises on immigration. And given that that is the hill on which Rishi Sunak is fighting his election campaign effectively, that is going to really hurt, and Labour will chalk that up as a win and hope that the MPs complain in private but keep quiet publicly.
Beth, live there in Downing Street. Thank you. The United States has held up a shipment of weapons to Israel over concerns about Palestinian civilian casualties in Gaza. Around 1.4 million people have been sheltering in the southern city of Rafah. Of those, Israel has told about 100,000 to the east of the city to evacuate. They've been told to go to a declared humanitarian zone along the eastern coast, but aid agencies say they don't have nearly enough supplies to support that many people. Israel says the Kerem Shalom crossing in the south is now open for trucks from Egypt, but the UN disputes this. And the Rafah crossing, where most of the aid had been entering, is now closed and under IDF control. Their armoured vehicles shown here. Well, footage geolocated by Sky News shows an IDF tank firing near the area this morning. At the Erez crossing in the north, there are also disputed reports about whether aid is getting in. From Jerusalem, our international correspondent John Sparks reports, and a warning, his report does contain distressing images.
The city of Rafah. It used to symbolise something of a refuge. But nobody believes that anymore. In the centre, our team finds the unmistakable signs of a missile strike. The smoke and distress and the horror. This is the second day of operations by the Israeli Defense Force in southern Gaza, a campaign they've described as limited. But this looks like all-out war. In Washington, Israel's closest ally went public with its displeasure.
So we've been very clear, Senator, as you know, from the very beginning that that Israel shouldn't launch a major attack in Rafah without accounting for and protecting the civilians that are in that battle space. And again, as we have assessed the situation, we paused one shipment of high payload munitions.
It seems the Israelis aren't listening. They've warned people to evacuate from the eastern side of Rafah, and hundreds of thousands have taken to the road, including May and her children, here perched on a cart. She's been displaced 4 times since the fighting in Gaza began.
As you can see, here we are. We don't know what lies around the corner. There's no safe place in Gaza. Even here. God help us.
They'll need to find a patch of ground in a place called Al-Mawasi. It's been designated by Israel as a humanitarian area, but the aid agencies have called it a nightmare. Now we've got a situation where you've got hundreds of thousands of people on the move again to a so-called humanitarian area. Are you prepared for that?
No one is prepared to deal with the forced displacement of 1.4 million people. It's not possible. It's actually just not possible. I don't even think if all the supplies we needed and wanted were in the Gaza Strip, it would be possible to help.
That's been disputed by the Israeli government. Officials say they've facilitated a surplus of aid and reopened this crossing called Kerem Shalom after a Hamas attack. But the UN says the assistance hasn't reached them.
No aid has been received in the Gaza Strip. No aid and no fuel. So this is the 3rd day now that we have received no humanitarian supplies.
Another strike is met with a collective cry of terror. The aftermath then blots out the sun. Israel's leaders say they're eliminating Hamas and its terrorist infrastructure as they seek total victory. But their critics accuse them of a catastrophe. John Sparks, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Russia's defence attaché is being expelled from the UK as part of a series of measures against Moscow. Home Secretary James Cleverly said it followed a pattern of malign activity by Russia across Britain and Europe, but the move has angered the Kremlin. As Sky's international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn reports.
It has been a country retreat for Russian diplomats in Sussex for 80 years, but also recently a base for Russian spying, says the British government. It is closing down Seacock's house and several other properties in what is one of the biggest anti-Russian espionage sweeps in years. Most significant is the expulsion of this man, Colonel Maxim Elovic, the first Russian defence attaché ever to be thrown out of Britain. Announcing the measures, Home Secretary James Cleverly anticipated a furious reaction from Russia.
In the coming days, we should expect accusations of Russophobia, conspiracy theories and hysteria from the Russian government. This is not new, and the British people and the British government will not fall for it and will not be taken for fools by Putin's bots, trolls and lackeys.
In Moscow, the Russian Foreign Ministry angrily accused Britain of using outright lies to justify anti-Russian measures. Its spokeswoman Maria Zakharova warned Russia would take appropriate measures in response. The British government believes Colonel Elovic is a secret operative with the GRU, Russia's military intelligence agency, thought to be behind a pattern of malign activity across Europe and allegedly hiring British nationals to carry out arson attacks on Ukrainian-linked businesses in the UK.
How unprecedented is what has just happened?
We spoke to one former British defence attaché in Moscow who says those attacks crossed a line.
The straw which broke the camel's back is the allegations that the GRU were maybe behind recent arson attacks. That's the final straw. And actually, ultimately, the security argument to expel the defence attaché has outweighed the advantages of maintaining military-to-military ties.
It is 6 years since 23 Russian diplomats were expelled from Britain in the wake of the Skripal poisonings in Salisbury, also the work of the GRU. But throwing out an official of Colonel Elovik's rank and status is unprecedented.
The British government will have thought long and hard before taking this drastic step because it doesn't come without a potential cost. In their day jobs, defence attachés play a key role as military liaison with the host country. Crucially, that can help prevent misunderstandings leading to dangerous escalation. And losing that important line of communication is not ideal in a time of war.
It is highly likely Russia responds in kind against British diplomats in Moscow. But its activity here and abroad requires punishment, says the UK, whatever the consequences. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Well, the expulsion of the man accused of spying for Russia is part of a series of measures cracking down on Moscow. But Sky News has found that, despite global sanctions being imposed on Russia at the start of the Ukraine invasion, it has actually been making more money from its oil and gas industry in the past 3 months. Sky's economics and data editor Ed Conway explains.
Now, one of the main ways that Russia and the Kremlin make money is by exporting lots of oil around the world. That's been part of their business for a long time, and it continues to be part of their business. In fact, if we look at total Russian oil exports outside of Russia, you can see they have come down in terms of the euros, the amount that's been earned since the invasion. But now look at the total amount. OK, so this is looking at the weight in tons of oil exports, and you can see, well, basically, they are more or less the same as they were before the invasion, so back in February 2022. And this is, in one sense, a little bit odd because there are all these sanctions on Russia. The UK, the EU, the US, they say they're not going to import Russian oil. They've imposed this price cap. Supposedly, Russia shouldn't be making much money or as much money from it. But actually, when you look at the revenues that the Kremlin basically earns from all of this oil, I'm going to give you a kind of average here. The 3-month average, look at that red line, it's up to the highest level now since May 2022. OK, so Russia is still making lots of money from oil. But how are they doing it? Well, here's a clue, OK? Let me just show you who was receiving Russian oil before the invasion of Ukraine. The main recipients were the US, the EU, and China. Now look at how that's shifted, OK? So the geography has shifted. These countries are no longer accepting it, but China, India, and Turkey are. And what's happening there forward is quite interesting. So oil goes from Russia, it goes to places like India, it gets refined, and then because at that point the sanctions don't apply anymore, they've been kind of laundered, that oil can go to Europe. In fact, it can go to the UK. And if you look at Indian oil exports from India to the UK, so before the invasion of Ukraine, they were relatively low. This is various different types of things, so jet fuel, diesel, and so on, from India. Now look what happens after the invasion. They go up quite sharply. So that is oil coming from India that wasn't previously coming. And what we do know, when we look at the various different refineries it comes from, is that, look at the red bits, a lot of that oil and the oil products, whether it's jet fuel, whether it's diesel, that comes to the UK, actually started its life as crude coming from Russia, except that rather than coming directly to the UK, it's gone via India instead.
Ed Conway there. Now, we're often hearing about record-breaking temperatures, and this is why. Today, it was revealed that April was the 11th consecutive month of record heat globally. Last month was 1.58 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels. Marine temperatures are also unusually hot. This map shows the hottest areas of sea surface temperatures in dark red, for example, the area around Brazil. Well, in Brazil, nearly 100 people have been confirmed dead after unprecedented flooding. Scientists say the extreme rain in Brazil was triggered by the El Niño effect, a naturally occurring rise in sea temperatures in the eastern Pacific by more than 0.5 degrees Celsius. But scientists point to human factors which could be contributing to the recent extreme weather. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi reports.
The water just keeps on rising. As far as the eye can see, a cityscape submerged under the brown floodwater. Authorities say this is the worst climate disaster to ever hit southern Brazil, and it's easy to see why. In Porto Alegre, streets and avenues are inundated, with the city's iconic buildings surrounded. Even the airport is an expanse of water, a vital link cut off from the outside world. Everywhere you look, it is utter devastation. More than 150,000 people have been displaced. Many of them had to be rescued in makeshift boats. This area is now without fresh drinking water, electricity, and there are dwindling supplies of food.
It's been very sad to see people desolate, not knowing exactly where to go, walking with no direction, not knowing which way to go without contact because there's no power, no communication, no cell phone signal.
The Brazilian government is describing this environmental catastrophe as a warlike situation, an emergency made worse by man-made climate change and a more unpredictable weather system.
The floods in southern Brazil are linked to El Niño, but not in a proportion of we have seen. We never had this volume of water. The fact that half of the state is underwater, this is climate change.
These satellite pictures show the extent of the damage. Rows of homes in a residential street before and after the deluge started. In some places, the floods are receding, but what people are returning to is heartbreaking. These communities have been ripped apart by the powerful torrential rains. And there's no sign this suffering will end anytime soon. Forecasters are warning the flooding will spread as more heavy storms are on their way. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
Well, back here, police say they've arrested 3 men in Bolton and Wigan on suspicion of the commission, preparation and instigation of acts of terrorism. Matthew Thompson joins us now. So what details do we know then, Matthew?
Well, we know these arrests happened very recently, in fact, within the last 3 hours or so at a series of raids on 4 properties in Bolton and Wigan. 3 men, aged 35, 36 and 51, have all been arrested on suspicion of terror offences. No word yet as to what those alleged offences may have been, nor indeed what the nature of the suspected terrorism is, but all 3 remain in custody, and police say that there are crime scenes still in place at all 4 of the addresses. Assistant Chief Constable Rob Potts of Greater Manchester Police, who leads on counter-terrorism policing for the northwest of England, said it was part of an ongoing police counter-terror operation. And he said in a statement that, I understand that any time arrests of this nature are made, that it will cause concerns and people will naturally have questions. Although we can't go into specific details of the investigation at this stage, he said, I want to reassure members of the public that we do not currently believe there to be any wider threat linked to today's activity. So I suspect, given that I said at the beginning, this is the very early stages of this investigation, it's really hours old, these arrests, that more details will be forthcoming as and when the investigation develops.
Matthew, thank you. Now, the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine has been withdrawn from market. The company says it's due to decreased demand and a surplus of updated vaccines. And it comes after the European Medicines Agency issued a notice that the vaccine is no longer authorised for use. Our science and medical correspondent Thomas Moore has this report.
In the dark days of lockdown, AstraZeneca's COVID jab was quite literally the shot in the arm we needed. Billions of doses later, its time is up. The vaccine withdrawn by the company because of falling demand. Augusta Turiaco's family won't miss it. She died 19 days after having the jab in Italy, and they're taking legal action against the pharmaceutical giant.
My family and I are not against vaccinations. We want to clarify this. When my sister died, we invited people to get vaccinated, as long as it was a safe vaccine. And for us, AstraZeneca, unfortunately, was not a safe vaccine.
Brian Pinker was the first to have the Vaxzevria vaccine in January 2021. Boris Johnson also had the jab, heaping praise on the Oxford University scientists who developed it. In its first year, 3 billion doses were distributed, with more than 6 million lives saved. But the United States never licensed the vaccine, and as clotting concerns grew, it was suspended or withdrawn, first in Denmark and then several other European countries, while in the UK it was restricted, first only to be used in people over 30, then those over 40.
And its legacy should be definitely a positive one rather than a negative one. So across the height of the pandemic, the AstraZeneca vaccine was indeed the vaccine for the world. It was a vaccine that was much cheaper to manufacture. It could be stored at fridge-like temperatures rather than the ultra-cold chain, the ultra-frozen temperatures that were needed by Pfizer and Moderna. So it was much easier to transport to, for example, rural settings in Africa and be deployed there.
AstraZeneca has always insisted the vaccine's benefits outweigh the risks. A spokesperson added, "We are incredibly proud of the role Vaxzevria played in ending the global pandemic. Multiple variant COVID-19 vaccines have since been developed. This has led to a decline in demand for Vaxzevria, which is no longer being manufactured or supplied." But the biotech that underpins the vaccine may survive, perhaps tweaked to avoid blood clots, ready for the next race against a virus. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Andrew Tate has been served with civil proceedings from the UK High Court by 4 British women. The case is being brought against the social media influencer after the Crown Prosecution Service decided not to prosecute in 2019. The women allege Tate raped and assaulted them and are seeking damages for injuries that they claim they suffered as a result. John Swinney has appointed Kate Forbes as his Deputy First Minister as he officially became the new leader of Scotland. The former Finance Minister decided not to stand against Mr Swinney in the SNP leadership contest after he promised her a significant role in government. More than 100 homes have been evacuated in a village in South Yorkshire where the bomb squad has been deployed. A cordon remains in place around a property in Grimethorpe near Barnsley after a number of suspicious items were found. Police say a 58-year-old man and a 57-year-old woman arrested on suspicion of firearms offences are in custody. Now, Prince Harry has attended a ceremony at St Paul's Cathedral for the Invictus Games. He was supported by his mother's family and his sporting family. But elsewhere in London, the King was holding a garden party at Buckingham Palace. The two are not scheduled to meet, citing a diary clash. Sky's royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, has more.
Despite everything, the crowds were pleased to have him back. Walking in St Paul's for an event that meant the world to him. Family were waiting, but not the royal side. Instead, Princess Diana's brother and sister wanting to share this moment with him as he marked 10 years since he launched his Invictus Games with a reflection on service.
Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same spirit. And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord.
Surrounded by his military family, his wife Meghan wasn't there, and neither was his father. As across London at Buckingham Palace, the other side of the family were instead supporting the King. At his first garden party since being diagnosed with cancer, apparently one of the events that made meeting Harry impossible. Whatever's going on, the contrast to the support they showed him 10 years ago at the launch could not be more stark.
For anyone who was hoping for any signs of reconciliation, that phrase that his father had other priorities does not read well. You then couple it with the fact that the Windsors seem to have snubbed the event here and the Spencers turned up. You can't help but be reminded of the tragic family split we saw in the 1990s.
Despite all the negative headlines, you can't deny the impact his efforts have had.
Thank you, Invictus, for giving me my wife back.
Thank you, Invictus, for giving me my life back.
Former GB captain David Wiseman is now on the board, a good friend of Harry and keen that all he's achieved isn't overlooked.
He's a veteran himself. He did 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. He's always said that's really where he sort of felt really at home in the military community. And so obviously this is something, it's a success story for him. It's something he's proud of and we're proud of him to be involved.
The departing walkabout was brief and carefully controlled. Whoever's at fault and has really stopped the family meeting it was now too late. He was gone. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, in central London.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the former Conservative special advisor, Anita. But among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Times, their headline, Starmer splits the party by accepting a Tory defector. That and plenty more when we come back. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories this evening. The Conservative MP for Dover, Natalie Elphicke, has crossed the floor and defected to Labour, saying that the modern Labour Party looks to the future. The United States has held up a shipment of weapons to Israel over concerns about Palestinian civilian casualties in Gaza. And the Russian defence attaché is being expelled from the UK for spying, apparently using several properties in England as bases. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the former Conservative special advisor, Anita. Welcome to both of you. Lots to discuss. So let's check out the front pages then, starting with The Times and the defection of Tory MP Natalie Elphicke to Labour is their top story. The headline, Starmer splits the party by accepting a Tory defector. The Eye, meanwhile, carries a warning from pollsters that not even a cut in interest rates can save Rishi Sunak at the next election. In the Daily Mail, the Conservative chairman warns that the country is in danger of being taken over by dangerous sectarian politics. The Telegraph previews a speech by the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, calling on the EU to get tougher with Russia over Ukraine. The Guardian leads with a poll of scientists which predicts catastrophic temperature rises are on the way, caused by climate change. The Metro has the story of 18-month-old Opal Sandy, who was born deaf but can now hear thanks to a gene therapy trial on the NHS. Worlds apart, the Mirror looks at Prince Harry's return to the UK as him and his father attend events 2 miles away from each other. According to the Financial Times, 50 firms which did big business during the pandemic, including Zoom and Peloton, have lost $1.5 trillion in value between them since the end of 2020. And finally, The Star mourns the loss of some of the more colourful insults in the English language, apparently caused by young people not knowing what they mean. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us and listen to our guests. So let's head to Kevin and Anita. Well, let's kick off with Natalie Elphicke. I don't know whether to start with the Tory perspective or Labour.
Oh, go with the Tory.
Go with the Tory, OK, right. The Times then, Starmer splits the party by accepting a Tory defector. The Tory defector, first of all, how damaging is this for Rishi Sunak? And what do you make of the Tory defector who's decided to defect?
So I think in terms of how damaging, I guess the answer to the question is it's so bizarre almost that, like, the narrative amongst Conservative MPs certainly is a bit of consternation and a bit of sort of rallying around, but also quite a big degree of bafflement. So in a way, like, it doesn't tell a particular clear story. And actually, Natalie Elphicke's statement, which is covered in part in this Times piece, but in others, kind of has a vague line about, you know, Rishi is not delivering, the centre ground hasn't been abandoned, which to most people didn't read like it was necessarily in Natalie's voice and doesn't have any specifics that really kind of speak to particularly immigration, which is obviously she is a Dover MP, and Dover is kind of one of the constituencies at the front line of small boats crossings, and she's been very vocal on that. So in some ways, it's so bizarre to MPs that it hasn't quite had the impact, I think, that that Labour was certainly intending in unveiling her at PMQs and then trying to ask lots of questions about immigration and small boats during the session.
No, it is totally extraordinary, is it not? I mean, what is the centre ground to an MP like Natalie Elphicke, for example? Even Ian Dale called her a hard right Tory headbanger.
Yeah.
Why does the Labour Party want a hard right Tory headbanger? I'm sure she'd dispute it, but talking about the centre ground, it's not been her politics.
Yeah, well, if Jacob Rees-Mogg and
Nigel Farage is the
on their way.
They were asked about that.
You know, you have to go back to 1977 to have a Labour MP defecting to the Conservatives when it was Reg Prentice. She's now the third Conservative MP defecting to Labour in this Parliament. Christian Wakeford, I can understand, he had bigger issues around employment. You could see Dan Poulter a fortnight ago, the NHS. But no, I can't. I thought it was a joke or it was a mistake with her, because everything she has said so consistently is being head-banging right. You would have thought she's more likely to defect to Reform UK than the Labour Party. Now, maybe she was a deep Labour sleeper agent all those years. Maybe she's had a Damascene conversion on the way to Parliament. Or maybe it's just terrible opportunism. But no, as Starmer hasn't united his party, he has split it over it, because they are thinking, why have you taken Natalie Elphicke with everything she said, attacking trade unions, when P&O were sacking workers, saying you can't control the borders, being slightly deranged Brextremist, blaming the EU for bureaucracy when it was Britain that came out of the common market, obviously the issue of the boats, and you go on and on and on. Never mind we're getting to having a dig at Marcus Rashford. who campaigned for free school meals, or having a pretty vile attack on the women who accused her husband of sexually assaulting them when he was convicted and jailed and she got the seat. So now he's, the Times are right. Starmer's split his party over this particular defect.
Well, look at the quote in the front of The Guardian then. We don't need people like that. Labour fury over Tory defector. Keir Starmer is facing a shadow cabinet anger, even at that level. Really, really extraordinary stuff about whether he even thought of saying no to her. But from his point of view, he's now got immigration with her being Dover and Deal MP, and he's got the NHS with Dr Dan Poulter, who's also decided
what he can say is, I've got Conservatives who say you can't trust the Conservatives on these key issues. When Suella Braverman says Labour's not to be trusted on the borders, you'll say, here is Natalie Elphicke. I'm not buying it myself, but he can say Labour's gathering MPs and the Conservatives are losing them.
Sorry, I mean, I think this is a thing that took literally everyone in Westminster by surprise. And so there was an opportunity for them to set out a really clear, an op-ed, a broadside that specifically went through why Natalie Elphicke thinks that Labour's approach to immigration is going to be more substantive, given she has consistently criticised Labour in particular and in public as well as in private about their approach to this issue. And the fact that that is not forthcoming means that this is quite dented in that respect. And I also wanted to reference this point around, the division. So apparently a female Labour MP was in tears over the news. It's interesting, very interesting, that the Shadow Chief Whip appears in the Times saying that he was late onto the discussion.
But he doesn't say it's briefed.
And it's understood to have, and understood to express concerns. Interesting that even the Shadow Chief Whip or someone around him is briefing that he's not happy about this news. And then you've also got Neil Kinnock, former leader of the party, basically saying we've got to be choosy about who we allow in our party. So, and the fact that you've got a situation where you go on Twitter and you see the likes of people tweeting, how is Diane Abbott not in the party, but Natalie Elphicke is? There is a real sense of disquiet, perhaps particularly on the kind of Labour left of the party, that says, what does this party really stand for? Because Kevin just listed a whole suite of issues. It's not one or two. And of course, Labour Tory, that happens, where the party and Natalie Elphicke seem incredibly far apart. So what is the message
Starmer's quest is just to go after Conservative voters. That's what it is. And he thinks he's left the traditional Labour voters will be there. Now, he lost some to the Greens.
And the Workers' Party.
And very few. But to the Greens were the nibbling. And of course, there's an issue with some of the Muslim community over Gaza. But he keeps going after Conservative voters. But I think sometimes you can be too clever by half.
Yeah.
And I think that is the case here with her, because she is so far right. And it's a fair point. Why is Diane Abbott still suspended when somebody who has said so much that would get her suspended if she'd been a Labour MP at the time, is now welcomed with open arms, and look, there we are, giving a nice little handshake, little, hand on the shoulder. I mean,
go on. You make a point. I've got another question, but yeah.
And what is the weakness of Sir Keir Starmer? People say we don't know what he stands for. How does this explain who Keir Starmer stands for?
He stands for ruthlessly winning. That's what he thinks he's doing.
But the point of how do you win?
Ruthlessly winning.
You win by by telling people who you are. Is this who Keir Starmer is? It's baffling.
No, he's taking Conservatives, but if you're Rishi Sunak, you have lost your third MP. Or he's lost two. The other one, Wakeford, went before him.
So you think it won't impact Labour's voting? Might it impact...
I don't know, it might, actually.
I mean, the Tories have gone from 80 majority when Boris Johnson won in 2019 to 38. I mean, that's, hemorrhaging over half now.
Yeah, fair few of them...
Does it keep going? Do we see more by-elections as Tory MPs decide they're not standing at the next election?
I think most of them now, you kind of see they don't want to trigger by-elections because they lose. They want to keep on getting their pay until they go. And if there are sleazing... I think
that's very unfair to MPs.
No, it's not. And if there are sleazing inquiries to get the 10-day suspensions which trigger recall ballots, that takes some time. So I doubt we'll get any of those again this side of the election.
And to the Daily Mail now, they say they have an exclusive. After dozens of pro-Gaza candidates were elected in local polls, the Tory chair now accusing Starmer of embracing a threat to democracy. talking about sectarian politics taking over, something that Rishi Sunak was addressed at the weekend. He said he's spoken about it on the steps of Downing Street and so on. So, you know, where is this threat coming from? Is it genuine?
But Richard Holden, the Conservative Party chair, is a very sectarian politician himself. The Daily Mail is no stranger to sectarianism. It's just which strand do you take? So I think that should be taken with a pinch of salt. And it seems to be the Green Party have issues with several councillors, some of whom used to be in the Labour Party, and then they left the Labour Party, went to the Greens, and there are issues around them. But he now seems to have just transferred that, Holden, for his own party political purposes, on the Labour. I think this is a pretty shallow attack by him.
Yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't use sectarian to describe himself.
No, he wouldn't.
I mean,
but
partisan, maybe. But
I mean,
you were.
I don't think Kevin explained what the story was about at all. So I think
it's a bit of political point scoring by a party chair in a paper that is back in the Conservatives. That's what it is.
So effectively, I think this is a really important issue actually, which is that in the conflict in Israel and Gaza, it's really important that all people in public life, including councillors, and I've been a councillor, you have a platform, you have a profile, and you have to use your voice responsibly. And there have been these instances where, and absolutely right people to get involved in politics, but the way that some of the Jewish community feel at the moment, and certainly some of the Muslim community similarly as well, during this conflict, it's crossing over into what I think is quite bitter divisions in the country. And I think it is important that we encourage, and actually we do reprimand people who are not living up to those standards.
Yes, and actually, on that note, we are getting warnings in the papers, aren't we, by Sunak, that actually universities do have to protect children against anti-Semitism, or young people, I should say, at that point. Cambridge fails to clear protests that Sunak warns of anti-Semitism is on the front of the Daily Telegraph. Fear of contagion of the protests that we've seen in America, for example, about this as well.
Yes, but you're right. You've got to come down hard on anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or any other form of racism, but protests in themselves are not automatically anti-Semitic. And we see this with the marches through London, and you'll now see it in the university protests. If there is any anti-Semitism around them, it has to be tackled. And there are specific issues. If you do have Jewish students on a campus, whether it's Oxford, Cambridge, any other university, and they feel threatened by it, those concerns have to be addressed. Well, that doesn't mean you cannot protest.
That's bottom left paragraph, but we were going to talk about the lead story. David Cameron, the EU must be tougher on Russia. This on the day that the Russian defence attaché is being booted out of Britain, and we await retaliation, no doubt, from Moscow about that as well, and the bases that they've identified too.
Yeah, and actually this is a really serious kind of moment where Lord Cameron has set out a broad kind of big picture about how the UK and actually the West should be responding to this issue as a whole, and really like the increasing geopolitical threat. So Lord Cameron kind of doesn't just talk about Russia, actually he talks about the response, for instance, to what's happened in the Red Sea. And the point is, act quickly, act decisively. Like, we can't cede ground and wait to see what happens in some of these instances where values and people's lives are being threatened. So I think a kind of important and quite provocative piece, I think, encouraging the West to have a more muscular approach to protecting its values.
It's not long ago that the Conservative Party was running on Russian and Russian-linked money.
That's a big allegation.
No, it was. There was a report into it. It showed it. Remember tennis lessons being auctioned off?
I think some of those people would say quite clearly that they are formally exiled from Russia as a result of the fact that they, were persecuted by the Russian regime. But yeah, please do continue.
OK, we will leave that one there if you don't mind. Coming up, the King and Prince Harry hold separate functions in London, but questions persist over why they are not seeing each other. Back in just a moment.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
We help you understand the world with us. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis.
You don't want to be remembered this way. You always want to be remembered as something positive.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again? I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me, once again, Kevin Maguire and Anita Boateng. Welcome back to both of you. Let's get to the eye, shall we? Interest rate decision coming up. A cut had been expected, but the predictions seem to be that it won't happen. But this is a political story about, you know, even a cut in interest rates won't save Sunak, Kevin.
No, and according to the eye, the expectation is, yes, going to be held tomorrow, 5.25, and no cut until the autumn, which politically is very damaging for the Prime Minister. Inflation's come down. He was hoping interest rates would come down too, so people would feel better off. Well, if it's delayed, it's very hard to translate, you know, to your argument. The economy's turned a corner. You're going to get better. Well, if people aren't feeling better, then it's very hard to get that message across.
Yeah, and the tricky bit for the Bank of England is the criticism is, did they leave it too late to put interest rates up? And are they holding on to them for too long, thereby damaging the economy when it's already in the right direction? So, it's, you know, this is the pressure comes from there as well, doesn't it?
Yes, and the other thing that's worth remembering is the bank doesn't just completely decide in isolation. What the Federal Reserve does makes a huge difference, and you can't really row hugely outside of their direction. So I don't think it's hugely surprising that interest rates are being held at 5.25%. But there are, I mean, I guess I wouldn't categorise it quite as being like, this is a thing that's going to save or determine an election. But I think having more positive economic news would be a positive thing. I think it just requires some more patience to ensure that we really get inflation under control, which is the thing that is biting the most.
Let's go to the royals now. Obviously, Prince Harry with Diana's family. This is the Mirror. And, you know, oh, there we go, worlds apart, no royal reunion, but just 2 miles separate, King Charles and Prince Harry. You know, I know you're not a royalist, but still lovely to see the King. out and about, you know, meeting the 8,000 guests at a royal garden party.
This will pain royalists, though, when you've got the family is clearly badly split, and there's been so much bad blood in public recently, and cancer can sometimes, an illness can bring people together. It hasn't if they're still 2 miles apart and citing diary clashes. I mean, look, 2 miles apart, you jump in a cab, you're over, hello, Dad, big hug, hope you're OK, here's a prezi, and then off you go, and none of that's happening. It's astonishing.
But he met a world leader today, he had 8,000 people in his garden, you know, it was a busy day. Run out of time, sorry about that, Anita, I didn't get to you on this one, but Kevin Maguire and Anita Botting, thank you very much indeed. Plenty more still to come on that. Let's take a look, though, now at the weather. Well, the rest of the week will be mostly warm and dry, but northern parts can expect some rain at times. There'll be a fairly mild, dry and sunny start tomorrow, although chilly in parts of the south. But northern and northwestern Scotland will be rather grey with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Expect a little mist, fog and low cloud elsewhere. The morning will bring plenty of warm sunshine after early mist, fog and low cloud lifts and breaks. But northern Scotland again staying mainly cloudy. Coastal fog, a little rain at times. Most places will be a couple of degrees warmer than today. Plenty more coming up in Sky News at 11. Another shock defection. This time it is Natalie Elphicke who crosses the floor, swapping the Conservatives for the Labour Party.